And so now this week, we're talking about life together. How do we create societies or communities or little small groups or areas in our church um, in order to create a means where we can nurture people and we can uh, do stewardship together and be witnesses together and serve together. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And let's see here. We have day 4. Today is going to be talking about band meetings. We're going to be talking about band meetings. And so we are in week 6, day 4. And again, based on the daily devotional in the Wesleyan tradition. So um, this week we've been talking about the different ways to have life together. In other words, be in the Christian life together. And so the first one was the mandate. The mandate is that we must be in groups together in order for us to be able to nurture each other, study, encourage, stewardship, witness, and service. So that's what those societies were for. That were called United Societies in Wesley's day that were created. Nowadays, we would see them more like life groups or small groups or something like that. Every church has a different name for it, and so we would call them maybe small groups, is what we normally call them in a Methodist church. And then day 2, we spoke about those societies and what they did. Yesterday, we spoke about the rules about having class meeting, and today we're going to be talking about band meetings. And so this will be the reading for here for today. For many in the Wesleyan tradition, the bands are unknown features. Nevertheless, we need to include them in our exploration of early Methodist spirituality. Wesley borrowed the idea from the Moravians, although such groups can be traced to a time even earlier. They served as the primary structure for mediating sanctifying grace through particular attention to those who were poised to, quote, go on to perfection. So that's remember I spoke about a little bit about John Wesley was always seeking that Christian perfection life, that life um, of a Christian that could be Christian perfection. So he always seeked what we call a holy life, and so this is way that they would seek that through these band meetings. The Moravians were, of course, that's a group. Was a group of um, German believers, and that's the group that he met. He went to one of their services and he had an epiphany there, and so forth. And so he tried very closely to borrow. Like I said, Wesley looked at different ways of how to lead a devotional life, and so that was one of the ones he would uh, borrow some stuff from the Moravians. Wesley utilized the band meetings in his first societies, but by the time of his death in 1792, many bands no longer functioned. Their purposes had been combined with the class meetings. We give attention to the bands because of the underlying principle that gave rise to them. Okay. Wesley believed that spiritual formation was fostered as persons of the same gender met in small groups of 5 to 8 members. In the bands, men met with men, and women met with women to confer in matters of the spiritual life. So, an example today would be, for example, the the Methodist women's ministry, and then we have, of course, the men's Methodist men's ministry. And so, um, those are kind of like some of those types of groups. They're band meetings, and so there's many other different ones, and I'm sure in depending on the denominations, they're named differently and so forth. And so that's some of the band meetings or band groups that they are called. Rules for the bands were drawn up by Wesley in 1738, 5 years before the general rules of the United Societies. An examination of these rules indicate that the purpose of the weekly band meeting was for testimony and mutual examination. So again, it's just a way for maybe a group of men to get together and see how they're doing in their journey. Are any of them going through anything? If any of them were going through any drinking problems, or maybe any issues with you know temptations or so forth, and also with women, same thing. Um, they banded together to see maybe how things were going in their households, that sort of thing. Let's see here. And then after a prayer and a hymn, one person began the process of speaking the state of his or her soul. Then the rest, in order, spoke concerning their state. Particular attention was given to overcoming personal faults and achieving a sense of forgiveness and peace with God. So again, it's just a sharing of their soul. How is your soul? How is it with your soul? Right? That's always the question. And so they would always sing with a hymn and so forth. And so that's the questions that we should be asking all the time as part of our congregational care. We should be asking those questions. How is it with your soul? How are you doing? Because of the intensive nature of the band meeting, this was the only level of Methodism where members had to be professing Christians. Okay, so they had to be professing Christians. Psychologically and theologically, this is not difficult to understand. Wesley knew that intimate, even risky sharing can only be done when one has settled the fundamental issue of being accepted by God. For one just outside the camp, or marginally related to the movement, the band experience could have been too threatening to them. And so, furthermore, the band meeting was also voluntary, and statistics indicate that only about 20% of Methodists took advantage of this spiritual formation structure. Okay, so it's a part of spiritual formation. It's not just daily devotional, but it's also spiritual formation. Why is it spiritual formation in these band meetings? Because again, it's a group of believers coming together, sharing their soul. And so it's a way of formatting your spirituality, because it is spiritual formation. You're learning from each other. You're learning techniques. You're learning how, maybe I find a way to deal with something in my soul that may help someone else, or someone else is dealing with a difficult situation, and I may learn from that in my own spirituality. So it is a spiritual formation. Before we leave our exploration of the societies, classes, and bands, we need to emphasize once more how the structures of early Methodism corresponded to Wesley's theology of grace. In the order of salvation, grace is the dominant theological theme. Okay? In the order of salvation, grace is the dominant theological theme. The dimensions of grace are these: prevenient, which is awakening; converting; sanctifying; and glorifying, grace for dying. Okay, so again, it's prevenient, which is an awakening, it's prevenient grace, right? And then you have converting grace, that's when you're convicted, and you are moved towards Christ. You have sanctifying grace, and then you have glorifying grace, which is grace for dying. So those are the stages of grace that John Wesley felt us as humans we had. There's prevenient grace, there's comforting, there's converting, sanctifying, and glorifying. Now, hovering over all aspects of grace, of course, is the church. But within the church, each element in the Methodist community served as a means to emphasize a dimension of grace. Societies, which are prevenient; classes are converting; and bands were sanctifying. Okay, so you see how those stages are. Um, Prevenient grace, is for those societies that we're seeking, we're trying to be awakened. And then you have the classes for the converting, because remember that the classes um, were groups that they used to get together, and they would especially pay attention to those that are new to the church, or maybe are new to that church, or had heard a maybe preaching in the church, and so there was something that they liked about the church, or they liked the message, and then they were now asking questions, and they wanted to know, what's the next steps. So those classes would be for those that were converting into Christians, converting grace. And then you had the people that were in the bands that were working with sanctifying grace, right? So there was grace, um, that now they're sanctified because they're believers, and now they're working and they're living that devotional life. That's the sanctifying grace. So this does not mean that the structures were limited to highlighting one type of grace, but it does show that in the structures of early Methodism, the full range of God's grace was demonstrated. Methodist life together enabled people to experience the full gospel of grace. Okay, so those were the steps that they used in Wesley's time in order to do life together. Those communities that would increase our grace, our knowledge. Again, the societies were set up in these types of meetings, and class meetings and band meetings and all this. Everything had a purpose. John Wesley was very disciplined, and everything was with a purpose. It wasn't just to get together. I'm sure they had times and places where they would just get together just to get together, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when we're talking about the devotional life in the Wesleyan tradition, everything Wesley did and created was for the one single purpose, was to reach perfection, and that's Christian perfection and a true holy life. Because the way he saw it, and the way we should uh, think of it in many ways, is that we serve a holy God. We have a God that is holy, 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 holy. I mean, he is holy, plain and simple. And so, if we were created in His image, and we're created to do His purpose and for His will, we need to be able to live a holy life, so that we're, again, worthy of our holy God. So here are the reflecting questions for today. What benefits do you see in Wesley's provision of bands where men could meet with men and women with women? Okay, so what benefits do you see in that? And those types of bands, groups. And you may have a men's breakfast or women's breakfast, or a men's Bible study, women's Bible study. There's many different ways that you can do this. What contemporary options exist in your church for this kind of community? Again, now in those days they were called band meetings. Uh, Now, they may be called men's ministry or women's ministry, or um, just different different types of names for those groups. I used to facilitate a men's Bible study at another church uh, here in El Paso on the west side, when I was a member of that church, and going through my certified lay minister classes, and one of the things that I did is I facilitated uh, a men's Bible study, and we used to call ourselves Mighty Men of God. So that was uh, one way that we used to call each other. Um, there is different names that you can call the groups. So that might be one of the ways that we know nowadays. It could be Bible studies, it could be just ministry groups, or just a gathering, even just a breakfast group. You know, we have those here at the Ridge. We have our Sisters in Christ and our men's ministry, and they do monthly breakfasts. Um, and so, again, look for us on our webpage at www.theridgeep.com. You'll find information about those groups and the Zoom links if you would like to join. Question number 2 is, how do the structures of your church conform to our I'm sorry. How do the structures of your church conform to or serve as channels for the various dimensions of God's grace? Again, how do the structures of your church conform to or serve as channels for the various dimensions of God's grace? And what are those dimensions again? We said it's prevenient grace, and that's an awakening. We have converting grace, sanctifying grace, and glorifying grace. Those are the stages, the various dimensions of God's grace. So, how do the structures of your church conform to serve those channels? And write those down. And then, as far as your relating for today, I hope again. Hopefully, you're writing in a journal, maybe in a notebook or something. Just some questions that you can ponder today. This is what you can ponder. In the past decade, we have seen the rise of the Christian women's movement, and more recently, the Christian men's movement. If you are familiar with either of these movements, compare the early Methodist dimension of bands with what you see happening in contemporary men's and women's groups. Again, in the past decade, we have seen a rise of the Christian women's movement, and more recently, the Christian men's movement. If you are familiar with either of these movements, compare the early Methodist dimension of bands with what's been happening in contemporary men's and women's groups. So, based on what we read today and what we looked at today, what are some of the similarities, or what are some of the things that you see um, that are familiar with what's happening now in contemporary life? Some of these groups that are forming, Christian women's groups and Christian men's groups and so forth. So, what are some of the similarities of that, and what are some of the benefits of that? So, make sure that you are journaling and writing down those questions. Again, this book, you can find it in the upper room books. It looks like this. It's the Devotional Life in the Wesleyan Tradition, and it's a workbook. So again, it's great because it has spaces where you can write questions, and you can take your notes and highlight and pencil in and pin in, or whatever you need to do. If you're needing the ISBN number or information on this book on how to get the workbook, please email me at sal@theridgeep.com. Or again, you can give us a phone call also, and that is at 915-881-4577. That's the phone number to the church, and that line gets directed to me. Yeah, also, you can send us prayer requests at prayer@theridgeep.com. I'll have all that information posted here below, um, with uh, with all that information, where to find us on Facebook, on here on YouTube. If you can subscribe to us, that would be fantastic. That way you get notifications when we have new information posted, or when we post our services or anything like that. Also, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, um, and our webpage at www.theridgeep.com. Uh, and then if you go to connect, you can click with us, connect with us. You can sign up to our weekly email. We have one. We send you a weekly email on information as to what's happening with the church, in reference to Bible studies or events, or when our services are happening, that sort of thing. So let us know how we're doing. If you like this, please let me know. Send me a message through here, or again, you can email me at sal@theridgeep.com. Please let us know what we're doing, how we're doing, what you like, and then also post if you'd like to do a love gift donation to the Ridge and our ministries. All the information will be here posted below, uh, and you can find it there, or you can go to www.theridgeep.com. Click on the menu tab, then click on give, and you'll see there a slot where you can send a gift to the Ridge. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today on week 6, day 4. Tomorrow we'll be on week 6, day 5. The title will be The Rest of the Story. Okay. Well, you all have a great day, and God bless. See you tomorrow.